The morning sun was just coming up when Keisha Williams looked out the car window at her new school. Westbrook Middle School sat on a neat green lawn with its brick walls and big glass doors. It looked nice enough, but nice didn't make her stomach stop turning. Her mother pulled into the drop-off lane and put the car in park. She turned to look at her daughter with soft eyes. "You're going to do great, baby. I know it's hard starting over, but this is a fresh beginning for both of us." Keisha nodded, even though she didn't feel great at all. She felt like she might throw up. Back in Atlanta, she had friends she'd known since kindergarten. She had teachers who knew her name and smiled when she walked in. She had a life. But then her mother got offered a nursing position at a hospital 2 states away, and just like that, everything changed. "Call me if you need anything," her mother said. "I mean it. Anything at all." Keisha grabbed her backpack and stepped out of the car. The September air was cooler here than it was back home. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward the entrance. Feeling like every step was taking her further from everything she knew, the hallways were already crowded with students, rushing to their lockers and talking in little groups. Keisha kept her head down and tried to find the main office. The school had sent her a map, but everything looked different in person. She passed by a group of girls leaning against the wall, laughing about something on one of their phones. One of them glanced up as Keisha walked by. Their eyes met for just a second before the girl looked away. Keisha finally found the office and got her schedule from a tired-looking woman behind the counter. First period was English, in room 204. She had 10 minutes to find it. The classroom was half full when she arrived. She picked a seat near the back, hoping to blend in. But blending in wasn't easy when you were the new kid. And it definitely wasn't easy when you were one of the only black students in a school full of white faces. Keisha had grown up in a neighborhood where everyone looked like her. Her church was black, her old school was mostly black. Her whole world had been filled with people who shared her culture, her background, her skin. Here, she stuck out like a single dark cloud in a bright blue sky. The teacher, a young man with glasses and a friendly smile, introduced her to the class. "Everyone, this is Keisha Williams. She just moved here from Georgia. Let's make her feel welcome." A few students mumbled hello. Most didn't even look up. Keisha slid into her seat and opened her notebook, pretending to be very interested in the blank page in front of her dot at lunch. She grabbed a tray and scanned the cafeteria for somewhere to sit. Every table seemed to belong to someone already. Groups of friends laughed and talked, completely unaware of the girl standing alone with her food getting cold. She spotted an empty table near the window and made her way over. At least she could eat in peace and watch the clouds roll by outside. She was halfway through her sandwich when she heard the whispers. "Is that the new girl?" "Yeah, she's in my math class. She's really dark, isn't she?" Keisha's hand froze. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew the voices were coming from the table behind her. "I've never seen anyone that dark before," another voice added. "Like, wow." Quiet laughter followed. Keisha put down her sandwich. Suddenly she wasn't hungry anymore. She told herself it was nothing. People were just curious. She was new, and she looked different from everyone else. That's all it was. Curiosity, not cruelty, but deep down, something didn't feel right. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She went from class to class, took notes she wouldn't remember, and counted down the minutes until she could go home. When her mother picked her up that afternoon, she put on a smile and said everything was fine. "Did you make any friends?" her mother asked hopefully. "It's only the first day, Mom. Give me time." Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're right. These things take time. But you're such a sweet girl. People are going to love you once they get to know you." Keisha wanted to believe that. She really did. The next few days weren't much better. She learned her way around the school and figured out which bathroom was the cleanest and which hallway to avoid during passing period because it was always too crowded. She answered questions in class when called on and kept her head down the rest of the time, but the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. She started noticing the looks. The way some students would glance at her and then look away quickly like they'd been caught doing something wrong. The way conversations would go quiet when she walked by, only to start up again once she passed. One afternoon, she was washing her hands in the bathroom when two girls walked in. They didn't notice her at first. They were too busy talking. "Did you see what she was wearing today?" One of them said. "That bright yellow shirt? Like, why would you wear that color when you're that dark?" The other girl laughed. "I know, right? It's like she's trying to make herself stand out even more." Kaisha's heart pounded. She looked up and saw her reflection in the mirror. Her dark skin. Her brown eyes. The face her grandmother always said was beautiful. The girls finally noticed her standing there. For a moment, nobody moved. Then they walked out without saying a word, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Kaisha gripped the edge of the sink and took a deep breath. She would not cry. Not here. Not where anyone could see. That night, she sat on her bed and looked at old photos on her phone. Pictures of her and her friends back home. Pictures of family cookouts and church picnics. Everyone in those photos had skin like hers, dark and rich and warm. Nobody ever made her feel bad about it. Nobody ever whispered about her color like it was something strange. She thought about her grandmother, who lived in a small house in Louisiana and made the best sweet potato pie in the world. Her grandmother had skin even darker than Kaisha's, and she wore it like a crown. "Baby girl," she always said, "God painted you with the richest colors he had. Don't let nobody tell you that ain't beautiful." Kaisha missed her grandmother. She missed everyone. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend back home. "How's the new school? Made any friends yet?" Kaisha typed back, "It's okay. Still getting used to it." She didn't mention the whispers. She didn't mention the looks. She didn't want to worry anyone. Besides, maybe it would get better. Maybe people just needed time to get used to her. She set her phone down and looked at herself in the mirror on her closet door. Her dark skin glowed in the soft light of her bedroom lamp. She tried to see what those girls saw. She tried to understand why her color was such a big deal to them, but all she saw was herself. The same girl she'd always been. The same girl her mother called beautiful every single day. The same girl her grandmother prayed for every night. She was still that girl. Wasn't she? Kaisha turned off the light and climbed into bed. Tomorrow was another day. Maybe it would be different. Maybe someone would finally see her for who she really was. Not just the color of her skin. She closed her eyes and hoped for the best, but something told her the worst was still coming. 2 weeks passed, and Kaisha learned something important about her new school. The whispers weren't going to stop. They were going to get louder. It started on a Monday morning. She was walking to her locker when she heard it. Not a whisper this time. A voice, clear and sharp, cutting through the noise of the hallway. "Hey, Charcoal." Kaisha kept walking. Maybe they weren't talking to her. Maybe it was someone else. But then the voice came again, louder this time. "I said, hey, Charcoal. You deaf or something?" She turned around. A girl with long blonde hair and perfect makeup stood in the middle of the hallway with her arms crossed. 2 other girls flanked her on either side, smirking like they were watching a show. Kaisha recognized the blonde one. Her name was Tiffany, and she seemed to run the school. Everyone knew her. Everyone wanted to be her friend. And everyone was afraid of her. Tiffany tilted her head and smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before it pounces. "That's your new name," Tiffany said. "Charcoal. Because that's what you look like. A piece of burnt charcoal." The girls beside her burst out laughing. A few other students nearby chuckled too. Kaisha felt her face get hot. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to say something. She wanted to fire back with something clever that would shut Tiffany up for good. But her mouth wouldn't work. No words came out. So she just turned around and walked away as fast as she could, the sound of laughter following her down the hall. That was the day everything changed. From that moment on, Kaisha wasn't Kaisha anymore. She was Charcoal. The name spread through the school like wildfire. People she'd never even talked to called her that. They said it in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in the bathrooms. They wrote it on sticky notes and slapped them on her locker. They typed it in group chats she wasn't even part of. Every single day she heard that word. And every single day it hurt a little more. She tried to ignore it. Her mother always told her that bullies feed on reactions. Don't give them what they want, she'd say. Hold your head high and keep moving. So that's what Kaisha did. She held her head high. She kept moving. She pretended like the name didn't bother her at all. But pretending was exhausting. One day in science class, the teacher put them into groups for a project. Kaisha ended up with 3 girls she didn't know. When she sat down at their table, one of them looked at the others and said, "Great, now our project is going to be dark and depressing." They all laughed. Kaisha opened her notebook and stared at the page. Willing herself not to cry. Another day, she was standing in line at the cafeteria when a boy behind her said, "Can you move? You're blocking the light." His friends cracked up like it was the funniest joke in the world. Kaisha moved. She always moved. She made herself smaller and smaller, hoping that if she took up less space, people would leave her alone, but they never did. She stopped eating in the cafeteria. The stares and the comments were too much. Instead, she started spending her lunch period in the library, sitting in a corner behind the bookshelves where no one could see her. She told herself it was because she liked to read. But really, she just couldn't handle being seen anymore. Her grades started slipping. She used to be a straight-A student back in Atlanta. School had always come easy to her. But now she couldn't focus. She'd sit in class and hear the teacher talking, but the words would just float past her like clouds. All she could think about was what people were saying about her. All she could hear was that word, charcoal, over and over again. At home, she put on a mask. She smiled at dinner and told her mother that school was fine. She said she was making friends, even though she hadn't talked to a single person in days. Her mother was working long shifts at the hospital and came home tired every night. Kaisha didn't want to add to her stress. She didn't want to be a burden. So she carried the weight alone. One night, she was scrolling through social media when she saw it. Someone had created a fake account with her school picture. The username was Charcoal Girl. The bio said, "Darkest girl in school. Can't see her at night." There were already 50 followers. People from her school. People who thought it was funny. Kaisha stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands were shaking. Tears blurred her vision. Until she couldn't see anything at all, she threw her phone across the room and buried her face in her pillow. And for the first time since moving to this town, she let herself cry. Really cry. The kind of crying that comes from deep inside your chest and feels like it might never stop. She cried for her old life, for her old friends, for the girl she used to be, the one who smiled easily and laughed loudly and never thought twice about the color of her skin. That girl felt so far away now, like a stranger from another life. The next morning, Kaisha stood in front of her mirror and looked at herself. Her eyes were puffy from crying. Her face looked tired. And her skin, her beautiful dark skin, looked like something she wanted to hide. For the first time in her life, she wished she was lighter. She wished she could blend in. She wished she was anyone other than who she was. She hated herself for thinking that. Her grandmother would be so disappointed. Her mother would be heartbroken. But she couldn't help it. The world had made her feel like her darkness was a flaw, a mistake, something to be ashamed of. And after hearing it enough times, she'd started to believe it. She went to school that day with her hoodie pulled up over her head. She kept her eyes on the ground and didn't talk to anyone. When Tiffany called out, "Hey, Charcoal!" in the hallway, Kaisha didn't even flinch. She just kept walking like she hadn't heard anything at all. But inside, something was breaking. That afternoon, her art teacher asked her to stay after class. Kaisha's heart sank. She figured she was in trouble for not paying attention. She'd been drawing in her notebook instead of listening to the lesson. But when the other students left and the room got quiet, the teacher didn't look angry. She looked concerned. "Kaisha," she said softly, "I've noticed you've been different lately. You used to participate so much in the beginning. You had such energy. But now you seem distant, like you're somewhere else." Kaisha shrugged. "I'm fine. Are you sure?" Because I've been teaching for a long time, and I know what it looks like when a student is struggling. Keisha opened her mouth to say she was fine again. That was her automatic response now. Fine, fine, everything is fine. But something about the way the teacher was looking at her made her stop. There was kindness in those eyes. Real kindness. The kind she hadn't seen since she left Atlanta, and suddenly, without warning, the tears came again. She told the teacher everything. The name-calling. The whispers. The fake social media account. The loneliness. The way she'd started hating the very skin she was born in. The teacher listened without interrupting. And when Keisha was done, when she had nothing left to say and no more tears left to cry, the teacher pulled up a chair and sat down right next to her. I want to show you something, she said. Something I think you need to see. Keisha wiped her eyes and looked up. She didn't know what was coming next. But somewhere deep inside, she felt the tiniest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The art teacher's name was Mrs. Coleman. She had gray streaks in her hair, and paint stains on her fingers that never seemed to wash off completely. She'd been teaching at Westbrook for over 20 years, and in that time, she'd seen a lot of kids come through her classroom. Happy kids, sad kids, lost kids. Kids who didn't know who they were yet, but something about Keisha hit her differently. After Keisha finished telling her everything, Mrs. Coleman didn't say what most adults would say. She didn't tell her to ignore the bullies. She didn't say kids will be kids. She didn't promise that everything would be okay if she just gave it time. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened up a folder of photos. I want you to look at these, she said. Handing the phone to Keisha, Keisha wiped her eyes and looked at the screen. The first photo was of a woman with skin so dark it seemed to glow. She was wearing a white gown and standing on a runway with bright lights shining down on her. She looked like a queen. No, she looked like a goddess. Her name is Nayakam Gatwek, Mrs. Coleman said. She's a model from South Sudan. People call her the Queen of the Dark. Fashion designers all over the world fight to have her walk in their shows. She's been on magazine covers, billboards, everywhere. And do you know what she says when people ask about her skin? Keisha shook her head. She says it's her crown. She says she wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Keisha stared at the photo. The woman in the picture didn't look ashamed of her darkness. She didn't look like she wanted to hide. She looked proud, powerful, like she knew exactly who she was and didn't care what anyone else thought. Mrs. Coleman swiped to the next photo. This one was of an actress Keisha actually recognized. She'd seen her in movies before, but never really thought about it. This is Lupita Nyong'o, Mrs. Coleman said. She won an Oscar a few years back. One of the biggest awards you can get in Hollywood. And when she gave her acceptance speech, she talked about growing up and hating her dark skin. She talked about praying to God every night to wake up lighter. She talked about the shame she carried for years. Keisha felt her chest tighten. That sounded so familiar. Too familiar. But then, Mrs. Coleman continued, she learned to love herself. She learned that her darkness wasn't a curse. It was a gift. And now she uses her platform to tell young girls all over the world that dark skin is beautiful. That they are beautiful. She swiped again. More photos. More dark-skinned women, models, actresses, scientists, writers, athletes, women who had achieved incredible things. Women who had faced the same hatred and ignorance that Keisha was facing now, and they hadn't let it break them. They had risen above it. These women didn't become successful in spite of their dark skin, Mrs. Coleman said. They became successful because they embraced it. They stopped letting other people's ignorance define them. They wrote their own story. Keisha looked up at her teacher. But how? How do you just stop caring what people think? Mrs. Coleman smiled gently. You don't stop caring overnight. It's a process. It takes time. But it starts with understanding something very important. What's that? That the people who mock you are not mocking you because something is wrong with you. They're mocking you because something is wrong with them. They've been taught to see difference as a threat. They've been raised in a world that tells them one type of beauty is better than another. That's their problem, Kaisha. Not yours. Kaisha let those words sink in. She'd never thought about it that way before. She'd spent so much time wondering what was wrong with her. Why her skin was such a big deal. Why people couldn't just leave her alone. But maybe the question wasn't what was wrong with her. Maybe the question was what was wrong with them. Mrs. Coleman stood up and walked over to a shelf in the corner of the room. She pulled out a thick book and brought it back to Kaisha. This is a book about colorism, she said. Do you know what that word means? Kaisha shook her head. Colorism is discrimination based on skin tone. It happens all over the world, even within black communities. Lighter skin is often seen as more desirable, more beautiful, more acceptable. It's a leftover from slavery and colonization, when having lighter skin meant you were treated slightly better by the people in power. Those ideas got passed down through generations, and they're still affecting people today. She opened the book and showed Kaisha some of the pages. There were photos and charts and stories from people who had experienced colorism firsthand. People who had been told they were too dark. People who had been made to feel less than because of the shade of their skin. This isn't just happening to you, Mrs. Coleman said. This is happening to millions of people around the world. And the only way to fight it is to refuse to accept it. To stand up and say that dark skin is beautiful. That all skin is beautiful. That no one has the right to make you feel ashamed of how God made you. Kaisha closed the book and held it against her chest. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. I want you to do something for me, Mrs. Coleman said. I want you to go home and think about who you really are. Not who those kids say you are. Not who social media says you are. Who you actually are, deep down inside. And then I want you to create something. A piece of art that shows the world the real Kaisha. The one who existed before all this ugliness started. The one who's still in there, waiting to come back out. Kaisha nodded slowly. She didn't know what she was going to create. She didn't even know where to start. But for the first time since coming to this school, she felt something other than sadness and shame. She felt a tiny flicker of fire. That night, Kaisha sat at her desk with a blank sketchbook in front of her. She thought about everything Mrs. Coleman had said. She thought about Nyakam Gatwek and Lupita Nyong'o. She thought about her grandmother and her mother, and all the beautiful dark-skinned women in her family who had come before her. And then she started to draw. She drew herself. Not the tired, beaten-down version that looked back at her from the bathroom mirror. The real her, the one with bright eyes and a wide smile, the one who used to dance around the kitchen while her mother cooked dinner, the one who laughed so hard at her grandmother's stories that milk came out of her nose. She drew herself surrounded by light. Golden light that radiated from her dark skin like she was the sun itself. She drew until her hand cramped and her eyes got heavy. And when she finally put her pencil down, she looked at what she had created and felt tears on her cheeks again, but these weren't sad tears. These were different. These were the tears of someone who was starting to remember who she was. She didn't have it all figured out yet. The bullies were still there. Tiffany was still there. The fake social media account was still there. Nothing on the outside had changed, but something on the inside had shifted, and sometimes that's where change has to start. Kaisha looked at her drawing one more time before turning off the light. Tomorrow she would go back to that school and face whatever was waiting for her. But tonight she had remembered something important. Her skin wasn't a flaw. It was a gift, and she was just starting to unwrap it. For the next 3 weeks, Kaisha lived a double life. At school, nothing looked different. She still walked through the hallways with her head down. She still ate lunch alone in the library. She still heard the whispers and the jokes and that awful name that followed her everywhere. On the outside, she was the same quiet girl who seemed to shrink a little more each day, but on the inside, something was burning every night after finishing her homework. Kaisha would lock her bedroom door and work on her secret project. She filled page after page in her sketchbook with drawings. Self-portraits that showed her dark skin glowing like it was made of starlight. Images of black queens and goddesses and warriors. Pictures that told the story of her pain but also her power. She wrote too. Words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She wrote about what it felt like to be called charcoal. She wrote about the shame and the anger and the loneliness. But she also wrote about her grandmother's voice telling her she was beautiful. She wrote about the history of her people who had survived things far worse than cruel words from ignorant kids. She wrote about what it meant to have skin kissed by the sun. One night she stayed up until 2 in the morning working on a poem. She called it charcoal. She took the very word that used to hurt her and turned it into something else entirely. Something powerful. Something true. She read it out loud to herself when she was done. Her voice was shaky at first, but by the end, it was strong. She felt chills run down her arms. This was it. This was what she had been waiting for without even knowing it. The next day at school, she saw a poster in the hallway. The annual talent show was coming up in 2 weeks. Students could sign up to perform whatever they wanted. Singing, dancing, comedy, anything. Kaisha stood in front of that poster for a long time. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The thought of getting up on stage in front of the whole school made her want to run away and hide forever. These were the same people who laughed at her, the same people who called her names. Why would she put herself in front of them like that? But then another thought came to her. A quieter thought, but somehow stronger. What if this was her chance? What if instead of hiding from them, she faced them? What if instead of letting them tell her story, she told it herself? Before she could talk herself out of it, Kaisha grabbed a pen and wrote her name on the sign-up sheet. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of her life. She practiced her poem every single night. She stood in front of her mirror and recited it over and over until she knew every word by heart. She practiced controlling her breathing so her voice wouldn't shake. She practiced looking up instead of down, meeting her own eyes in the reflection. Mrs. Coleman helped her after school. She listened to Kaisha rehearse and gave her feedback. She taught her how to use pauses for effect and how to let the emotion come through without losing control. She told Kaisha that she was proud of her, and Kaisha almost cried right there in the art room. She also worked on a slideshow to go along with her performance. Photos of dark-skinned women throughout history. Scientists and artists and leaders who had changed the world. She included some of her own artwork too, the self-portraits she had been creating late at night. She wanted people to see what she saw when she looked in the mirror now. The night before the talent show, Kaisha couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible thing that could go wrong. What if she forgot her words? What if people laughed at her? What if this whole thing was a huge mistake? She picked up her phone and looked at the photo of Nyakam Gatwek that she had saved as her wallpaper. That woman had faced criticism and hatred her whole life. People had told her she was too dark to be a model, and she had proven every single one of them wrong. If she could do it, maybe Kaisha could too. The day of the talent show arrived faster than Kaisha was ready for. She sat through her classes without hearing a single word the teacher said. Her stomach was in knots. Her hands were sweating. Every time she thought about what she was about to do, she felt like she might pass out. When the final bell rang, she went to the auditorium to check in. There were about 20 other acts performing that night. Singers, dancers, a kid doing magic tricks, a group of boys doing a comedy sketch. Kaisha was scheduled to go near the end. She waited backstage as act after act went on. She could hear the audience laughing and clapping through the curtain. The sound made her even more nervous. These were the same people who had made her life miserable for months. In a few minutes she would be standing in front of all of them. Her mother was out there somewhere. Kaisha had finally told her everything a few days ago. Her mom had cried and held her tight and promised that things would get better. She had taken off work tonight just to be here. Knowing she was in the audience helped a little. Finally, it was her turn. Kaisha walked out onto the stage wearing a long white dress that her mother had helped her pick out. The bright lights hit her face, and for a moment she couldn't see anything at all. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw them. Hundreds of faces staring up at her. Teachers, students, parents, everyone. She spotted Tiffany in the third row, sitting with her friends. They were already smirking, whispering to each other, probably making jokes, probably waiting for her to fail. Kaisha took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Kaisha Williams," she said. Her voice echoed through the auditorium. "Some of you know me by a different name. A name you gave me without my permission, a name you thought would break me." The smirks started to fade, the whispering stopped. People were actually listening. "You called me charcoal," Kaisha continued. "You said it like it was an insult. Like being dark was something to be ashamed of, like my skin was a mistake." She paused and looked out at the crowd. Her heart was racing, but her voice stayed steady. "But here's what you didn't know about charcoal." The slideshow started behind her. Images of dark-skinned queens filled the screen. Scientists, artists, warriors. Charcoal is created under pressure. It's what's left when fire has done its worst. And instead of being destroyed, it becomes something useful. Something powerful. Artists use charcoal to create masterpieces. Charcoal purifies water. It filters out poison. And if you put charcoal under enough pressure for long enough, you know what it becomes? She let the question hang in the air. "Diamonds," a murmur rippled through the audience. Kaisha felt the energy in the room shifting, then she began her poem. She spoke about the history of colorism, about the pain of being told you're too dark, about the nights she spent crying and wishing she was different. But she also spoke about her grandmother's love and her mother's strength, about the beauty in darkness, about stars and night skies and rich black soil where life begins. By the time she reached the final lines, her voice was ringing through that auditorium like a bell. "You tried to make charcoal my shame, but I'm turning it into my name. I am the dark that holds the light. I am beautiful. I am worthy. I am right." Silence. For one terrible second, Kaisha thought she had made a huge mistake. She thought everyone was going to laugh at her. Then someone stood up, then another person, then another, and suddenly the whole auditorium was on its feet, clapping and cheering so loud that Kaisha could feel it vibrating in her chest. She looked out at the crowd through tears she didn't even try to hide. She found her mother's face in the audience. Her mom was crying too, clapping harder than anyone, and in that moment, Kaisha knew that no matter what happened next, she had already won. The morning after the talent show, Kaisha woke up to 17 missed calls and over 200 text messages. At first she panicked. She thought something bad had happened. But when she started scrolling through the messages, her jaw dropped. They were from people at school, kids she had never even talked to before, and they weren't mean messages. They were the opposite. "That was incredible. You made me cry. I had no idea what you were going through. I'm so sorry. You're amazing." Kaisha sat on her bed reading message after message, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe it. These were the same people who had walked past her in the hallways without a second glance. The same people who had laughed at the jokes and done nothing to stop them. And now they were reaching out to her like she was someone who mattered, because she was. She always had been. She was just finally starting to believe it. When she got to school that day, everything felt different. People looked at her, but not the way they used to. There were no whispers behind her back. No cruel jokes. Instead, people nodded at her. Some of them smiled. A few even stopped her in the hallway to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. One girl, a quiet freshman Kaisha had never spoken to, grabbed her arm outside the cafeteria. The girl had dark skin too, not quite as dark as Kaisha's, but close. Her eyes were red like she had been crying. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "I needed to hear that. More than you know." Kaisha hugged her. She didn't even think about it. She just pulled that girl into her arms and held her tight. Because she understood. She understood exactly what it felt like to carry that weight alone. The video of her performance spread fast. One of the teachers had recorded it on her phone and posted it online with Kaisha's permission. Within 2 days, it had been shared over 10,000 times. Comments poured in from people all over the country. Dark-skinned girls who had been bullied just like her. Parents who wanted to show it to their children. Teachers who wanted to use it in their classrooms. A local news station reached out and asked if they could interview Kaisha. Her mother was nervous about it at first, but Keisha said yes. She sat in front of the camera and told her story to a reporter with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She talked about the bullying, the fake social media account, the nights she spent wishing she looked different. And she talked about how she found her way back to loving herself. The interview aired on the evening news. More messages flooded in after that. A nonprofit organization that focused on youth self-esteem invited her to speak at one of their events. A children's book author reached out and asked if she could turn Keisha's story into a picture book for young girls. A high school 2 towns over asked if she would come perform her poem at their assembly. Keisha said yes to all of it, but the most surprising thing didn't happen on television or online. It happened at school about a week after the talent show. Keisha was at her locker getting her books for first period when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around and found herself face to face with Tiffany, the girl who had started it all. The girl who had given her that awful name. The girl who had made her life miserable for months. Keisha's whole body tensed. She braced herself for whatever was coming next. Another insult. Another joke. Another reminder that some people would never change, but Tiffany didn't look like herself. Her usual confidence was gone. Her eyes were puffy and red like she had been crying. She stood there for a moment without saying anything, just looking at Keisha like she was trying to find the right words. "I watched your video," Tiffany finally said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I watched it like 5 times. Keisha didn't say anything. She just waited. "I didn't know," Tiffany continued. I knew what I was doing was mean. But I didn't really think about how it was affecting you. I didn't think about how it would make you feel about yourself. I just thought it was funny. I thought everyone was laughing, so it was okay." She paused and looked down at the floor. But it wasn't okay. It was really messed up. "And I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry." Keisha studied Tiffany's face. She had imagined this moment so many times. She had imagined telling Tiffany off, making her feel as small and worthless as Keisha had felt. She had imagined revenge, justice, payback, but standing here now, looking at this girl who suddenly seemed so small and lost, Keisha didn't feel any of those things. She just felt tired. Tired of carrying anger. Tired of letting this girl take up space in her head. "I'm not going to say it's okay," Keisha said slowly. "Because it wasn't okay? What you did really hurt me. It made me hate myself for a while. And that's not something I can just forget." Tiffany nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I forgive you," Keisha continued. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to move on. I'm not going to let what you did keep controlling my life." Tiffany wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm going to do better. I promise." Keisha nodded. She didn't know if Tiffany would keep that promise or not. People don't change overnight. But that wasn't her responsibility. Her only responsibility was to herself. She turned back to her locker and grabbed her books. When she looked up again, Tiffany was gone. That afternoon, Keisha met with Mrs. Coleman and the school principal. They wanted to start a new club focused on self-esteem and diversity. A safe space where students could talk about their experiences and support each other. They asked Keisha if she would help lead it. She didn't even have to think about it. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." They called the club Every Shade Beautiful. It started with just a handful of students, but within a month, the membership had grown to over 40 kids. They met every Thursday after school in Mrs. Coleman's art room. They talked about colorism, bullying, self-image, and identity. They created art together and shared their stories. Some kids cried. Some kids laughed. All of them felt less alone. A few months later, Keisha's mother framed one of her self-portraits and hung it in their living room. It was the first one she had drawn that night after talking to Mrs. Coleman, the one where she was surrounded by golden light. Every time Keisha walked past it, she remembered how far she had come. Her grandmother called her on a Sunday afternoon, her voice thick with emotion. "Baby girl," she said, "I always knew you had something special inside you. I always knew you would shine." But watching you find that light for yourself? That's the proudest I've ever been. Keisha held the phone tight against her ear and smiled. I learned it from you, Grandma. Everything I know about being proud of who I am, I learned from you. She still had hard days sometimes. The world didn't magically become perfect just because she had found her voice. There would always be ignorant people. There would always be cruelty and prejudice and pain, but Keisha had learned something that nobody could ever take away from her. She was not defined by other people's ignorance. She was not limited by their small minds. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, dark skin and all, and that was more than enough. That was everything. The girl they called Charcoal had become a diamond, and she was just getting started.